Good morning, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to Vegan World 2026, the Moonshot of Our Generation. This is the 8th episode, and today we are joined by Dr. Shelley Ostroff, and we are going to be talking about the World Water Law that she's pioneered, among other things that she has pioneered. And to me, it's been amazing to watch the evolution of Shelley's thinking over the years. And so it's a pleasure to have you on, Shelley. And I'm looking forward to our discussions today.
Thank you so much, Silas. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, so, as we all know, the U.S. Constitution, one of the founding principles is the patent law that got put into it, that anyone who invents anything is allowed to enjoy its fruits for 17 years. And so basically it was, we are organized around protection of private property and property, intellectual property, and so on. So this is why I find it fascinating to talk to you about the World Water Law, because we are talking about how would we govern ourselves in a sustainable civilization, ecological civilization. And so one of the foundational questions there is, what are we governing ourselves around? And so, give me an idea of how are we going to do this? What do you see the World Water Law?
Gosh, well, you're starting with something around patents, which to me is one of those crazy human ideas that we can actually patent an idea as if it's ours to patent. So one of the images, metaphors I use is that in life, each part of the system has a unique gift to give. And the bees, for instance, don't patent their pollinating ability and hold everyone ransom to it. Our gifts are nourished by the system. And so in turn, they must nourish the system. And to think of our intellectual property or even the way in which we control other aspects of life, resources, or anything like that as something we can patent is part of the violation of the laws of life and the laws of basic mutual nourishment, which is the foundation of life itself. The way that I see life happening is through a very fundamental code that when I've delved into how does life organize itself without hierarchical leadership structures, without laws, without laws in the way that we know laws, I came up with one simple code that life organizes itself not through any particular leader, but through a code of life, which I call the vitality code, where each part of the system receives precisely what it needs in order to manifest its unique potential in service of the whole. So if we look at our human body, if we look at an ecosystem, if we look at how the world works on a biological level, on a living systems level, each part is interdependent with a whole. It does its unique function, and it doesn't work for itself alone. It's nourished by the whole and in turn nourishes the whole. So you're talking about the patent law, which to me is something that is a derivative of a much more fundamental flaw in the way that humans govern. And that is it's very human-centered and it's very self-centered rather than eco-centered. So it doesn't understand our relationship with the whole. And when we violate nature, when we violate the laws of nature, when we tend to own them or block them off from the ability of others to have access to it, when we consider it ours to do what we want with and to tamper with, and to use our skills or nature for our own benefit, to me that's a sure foundation for disease and for the destruction and devastation that we are seeing now. Right. So, when I've been researching this, and we created, Jan Golding and my partner and myself initiated the World Water, the Codes for a Healthy Earth, which is this whole system framework for what do we need to think about if we're going to change our governance system. It's clear we need to change it. It's not about fixing any particular part of it. It's not about renovating the upper floors of a rotting structure. It's about fundamentally transforming the way in which we organize ourselves as a species. And we are in a crisis situation now. And in some ways that's good, because it's really bringing us to understanding that if we don't come together and act now for the good of the whole, nothing is going to change. We're going to continue in this trauma vortex. So one of the key questions is, how do we, in this culture of fragmentation, in this culture of split, in this culture where everybody's there for themselves, for their country, for their nation, for their race, for their tribe, for their family, for themselves, how do we create coherence? And in some ways, the World Water Law, the coronavirus has given the perfect conditions for something very, very new to emerge. We understand that we're at a bifurcation point, a choice point, where there are certain mechanisms of control that are working to tighten their grip on what's left of the nature of, in its wildness, in its pure living system. And those that are really working incredibly hard for finding ways for regeneration and healing of the planet and all its inhabitants. And we're really working in many ways in parallel at the moment. So as we dream into how can we effect this change, to me, one of the answers is when we go back to source, when we go back to really looking at what is the one source of life, what is that one unifying element that can really bring us all together to remind us who we are and why we're here. And to me, the answer came during the corona, at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was very clear. It was just, the one thing we all are, the one thing we all need, the one thing that we can all understand that we need is water. And right now, the water crisis is really coming closer to everybody's doorstep. It's a very intimate part of our lives. And those that are immune from it or drinking bottled water still don't understand just how damaging bottled water even is, not only to the planet, but also to our bodies. And so water feels like it is something that can really unify us for citizen-led action to transform the systems. And so we're proposing a world water law. And should I share more about that?
Yes, please.
So the World Water Law is a proposal for a law that basically says four things: total common sense. I mean, this is if we were to run a village, if we were to have decent home economics, the first thing that we would look out for was water, right? It's the foundation. We want clean water for our family, for our village, for our animals, for our plants, and this is becoming a rare commodity. We've commodified water. So the World Water says four things. It says we need to get together uncompromisingly to restore and protect our water sources, watersheds, all the planetary waters. It's foundational. We're an interconnected living system. Our health depends on the health of the ecosystem. The health of the ecosystem depends on healthy water. So the first thing we need to do if we're going to manage the pandemic, manage climate change, manage everything else, is restore the planetary waters and the planetary water cycle, because it's not just about cleaning up one watershed or finding technology to bring water to certain humans. It's about understanding that the water we need is part of a water cycle. And if we're going to restore the water cycle, we need to understand how water is dependent on the trees, on the animals, on the conditions for all of life to flourish. It's about restoring the web of life. It's interdependent. So when we start to heal water, we begin to really understand the interconnectedness of the system. The second part of the World Water Law is to talk about the access of all humans and animals to natural, uncontaminated water.
Right.
So this is, self-obvious. This is how nature organized itself. Water is available for all. That's the original law of water. It's the original law of life.
Mm-hmm.
And in humans violating that fundamental law, we have actually created enormous disease and destruction, because there's this cascading effect when we impact water at the source. We are impacting human health, we're impacting planetary health, we are creating enormous disease in the system. We're creating a lot of injustice, and we know how much injustice happens. We know how many wars are fought around water. This whole concept of somebody owning water and at the expense of another is a violation of that original law. So this is really about putting the laws of nature, realigning with the laws of nature, and through this one simple law that we can all get behind. And the other aspect of the World Water Law is to ensure that we are all held accountable for our impact on water everywhere.
Right.
Corporations, governments, individuals, all of us. So this puts accountability into the system. And, accountability is such a big thing, because much of what we're seeing today happens because it happens in secretive ways, and because no one's really held accountable. And if big companies actually pollute water, they're given a very insignificant fine in terms of what it means for them to, okay, I'll pay the fine, but I'll make the billions on destroying life, and I'll pay the fine. It's worth it in the long run, for the bottom line of the company. So these elements are essential, restoring the watersheds, restoring the water cycle, and making sure that all animals and humans have access to natural, uncontaminated water, and finally accountability in the system. That's the gist of it. Simple, right. Common sense. And when I think about it, it just reminds us how far we've come from that simple common sense, when we see that most of our laws not only enable, but also actually actively support the devastation and exploitation and domination of water and of all, of nature.
Yeah, see, this is why I began with talking about the idea of private property and owning things. And because, when we have the idea that we can be secretive about our processes, about what we are really using, what chemicals are we using to create our products, then we are secretive about what we are effluing, what is coming out of our processes, and what is being poured into the environment, which eventually gets into the water, right? So I think the World Water Law is completely incompatible with a system that has private property.
It does. It is.
Right. Yeah.
And yet, it makes so much sense.
Right. Yeah. So it's pointing out to us how out of out of alignment with nature our current systems are, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I see this as the foundation for a new constitution that we need to be creating for the world, right? Mm-hmm. A World Water Law, because it is fundamentally, it's like just like the patent system was the foundation of the U.S. Constitution. For this new vegan world constitution, I see World Water Law as the foundation, as one of the foundations of what we need to be organizing around.
Absolutely. It is such a foundational law, and it's not human created. This is the law of water. It is the law of nature.
Right.
That's clean, pristine, natural, uncontaminated water for all of life. And it's humans that upset that, because no other animal, no other species interferes with water for all, pure water for all. In fact, they're part of that cleansing and clean water for all process. And we're actually violating that and going against it. And when you say that it's the foundation for for a new constitution. It's, yes, it's time for a new constitution. It's time for a radically ancient new way of organizing ourselves, which is aligned with the principles of life. And so the world water law starts at source.
Right.
Water is the source of all of life. We all birth from water. We are all, made of water. Something, 99% of our molecules are water. So we are water beyond our, superficial differences of race, religion, culture, and all of that. We are water beings. And so when we all need water in the same way.
Right.
So it puts us in the same boat. It puts us in the same ocean. We are in the same ocean. And that, going back to source, when we actually start to put that as the foundation for any other law, it activates a whole system healing transformation in the system, because everything has to align with it. So we transition to a water-centered economy, which is a life-centered economy. We transition to water-centered education, which is life-centered education. Because when we understand water, we understand ourselves, we understand life, and we can become a healthy part of life again.
Right, yeah. We don't really realize it, but every time we go, we assume that, water has to be in a bottle. Right? That fundamentally, that's saying that we are okay with the way things are when we buy water in a bottle, right? That water has to be purified by some corporation and given to us.
These companies are really stealing the water, making vast profits on it, and creating havoc in the environment. And there is no real justification from it. So if law doesn't give law is not just. Our justice system is unjust if it does this fundamental violation, and supports it. It's that simple, it takes a long time to figure it out. For me, it took a long time to figure out just how foundationally problematic our system is.
Right.
But when you really think about it, the violation of water, the ability of anyone to contaminate the water anywhere is bizarre, it's suicidal, and yet we accept it as just a right of someone that is wealthy enough to be able to do it.
Right. Even the idea of cutting down a forest and turning that into grazing land for our animals, you're interfering with the water cycle. You're interfering with the system that is purifying the water in the first place.
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
So that's the beauty of the World Water Law, because it within it, you realize that all of those other industries that are actually undermining life cannot be legitimate anymore.
Correct.
They're going to have to transform in order to be able to align with the World Water Law. And the beauty of it is also that 99% of people even would say, yes, of course, I want clean water, not only for my children, but for my grandchildren. So it's not enough to fix something temporarily. We have to look 7 generations beyond and to say, how do we protect our children and our grandchildren and make sure they have access to clean water? Because this whole concept of sustainability, which is saying, okay, how do we use as much as possible and give back as little as possible, as long as it's sustainable, is not a healthy concept.
Right. I mean, to me, sustainability is about playing an infinite game. As human beings, we play games, and then we also tell stories around the games. And then this is how we organize ourselves among millions and billions of us doing cohesive things together. And currently, our game is all based on who gets the most, and who's able to extract the most using the rules of the game, bending the rules of the game. And the game actually was not designed by us in the first place. It was designed by our ancestors. Who knows, right? It's just we were born into this game, and now we are being called to think about the game we are playing and see how do we turn that into an infinite game? Because this game is finite.
Right. And so, the word sustainability, I prefer to transform to a more healing word, thriving. How do we create a thriving world for all of life rather than a sustainable one? You don't want your family to be sustained. You want them to thrive.
Right.
So, as long as we're thinking in concepts of sustainability, which is a little bit utilitarian for me, like, okay, how do I extract as much, give back, make sure that we can somehow survive, but at least live the best we can. So if we transform the game you're talking about to rather a game of, valuing people who actually give back the most,
right,
rather than who take the most, we're idealizing those and it's part of the same system that promotes the same system of capitalism and idealizes those that use their intellect for their own glory.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a sustainable game at all, let alone a thriving game.
Oh, absolutely. This is a game of winners and losers, right? The game we are playing is a game of winners and losers. So those who win, they have the right to, they enjoy their winnings. And so we are all organized around protecting the person who has won the most and making sure that they can enjoy their winnings. And this game obviously will have a finite winner. Eventually there'll be one winner, and the rest of us are all supposed to lose.
And that winner will be a very temporary, it'll be a very temporary win because,
right.
If we don't get our act together at this particular moment in time and radically transform the system, mm-hmm. there will be no winner. Right. Because everybody is subject to the climate, everybody's subject to the air, and everyone's subject to the water. And as arrogant as humans are, we cannot create water.
Right.
And we cannot stop the floods. And we have to deal with our own limitations. All this arrogance about going to, Mars and everywhere else, when we're barely able to manage our own home in a good way, in a way that's good for all. It's such a disconnect from our real role as stewards of the planet. But I think we're learning, and this is the time where the learning is accelerated.
Absolutely.
And that's the beauty of it. This World Water Law and the codes for a healthy earth, I feel, have emerged from the collective consciousness. They build on so much of what people have already done, on the water protectors who've really voiced the call to protect the waters. They saw it long before many of us, the indigenous peoples who are fighting at the front lines for water, and all of those incredible stewards of the world who are working on regenerative agriculture and on solutions. So the world, at this particular moment in time, it's not surprising that the World Water Law has emerged in the collective consciousness as a way forward. It may have come through us, but it feels like it's so resonant with what the field needs. It's the medicine of our time, to really help us think out of the box and to say, okay, our current legal system does not have a mechanism for introducing a world water law. The legal system is actually built to defend against any common sense laws like this that are citizen-led and that will shift the power structures, because it's invested in sustaining itself. But that doesn't mean we can't reinvent something. It doesn't mean that we can't take our authority and responsibility as citizens of the world to say, okay, the systems we've built and colluded with don't work. We are all somehow colluding and responsible. We can't do that any longer. Now let's get together behind something that has the ability to really benefit all of life. When we deal with water, we are not privileging anyone, not any humans and not any beings. It's for all. And that's the beauty of it. It simultaneously benefits all. And you can imagine, I don't think human beings are aware of the impact of water on our health and on our consciousness. And I'm just learning it now, and I feel like a real novice around it. Mm-hmm. But the impact of water on health, it's so essential. And so the World Water Law, which really comes to say, instead of dealing with creating and focusing on creating artificial vaccines, which in turn create the potentiality of infinite new diseases and doesn't deal with the root cause of the disease, it becomes another profit-oriented enterprise. And now we're dealing with, pro-vaccine and against vaccine, and to me, that's all off point. The point is, how do we proactively strengthen our collective immune system and transform the way we organize ourselves as a system so that we can prevent such, a holistic preventative approach to health as a interconnected living species feels to me a much more useful way of organizing and thinking about our current crises.
Right. So, but unfortunately, we are currently organized around whatever makes the most money, right? So that's the game we are playing.
Right.
And so clearly this, if everyone is healthy, there is no money to be made of these people. So just to grow our economy and make more and more money and make more and more economic activity happen, we are deliberately, deliberately monetizing everything, including our water, including our, ecosystems. So if a dead tree is worth more than a live tree, we cut down the tree. If an animal is worth more dead than alive, we chop down the animal and kill it. And if a human being is worth more sick than healthy, we sicken human beings deliberately.
Yeah.
So, this is the game we are playing. This is the finite game that's going to end. We know that. This is why, I like the fact that people are talking about sustainability, because that fundamentally is about talking about an infinite game. So there is an awareness that the current game is not sustainable. Right? There's an awareness that this is a finite game. It's going to end. So at least people are talking about sustainability and talking about turning it into an infinite game. And then, of course, we will realize that to have an infinite game, it has to be a game of thriving, not sustaining.
Yeah.
So I like the way we are framing it, like Kate Raworth is framing it as in the form of donut economics, which fundamentally is impossible in a system in which there are secrets. It's impossible if corporations don't tell us what it is that they're putting in their products.
Yeah.
Because then you cannot measure how much chemical pollution you're putting into the environment.
Yeah.
So the first documentary that we did was The Human Experiment, which talked about the chemical pollution and how laws were changed, were jiggered in the 1950s, so that corporations don't have to disclose what they're putting in their products.
Yeah.
and so, obviously now there are like 140,000 different chemicals that we are pouring into the environment, about 250 billion tons of it. 4 times as much as the CO2 we are pouring into the environment. And no one really knows what it's doing. And this is why we need to clean up the water for our own drinking purposes.
Yeah. And part of that is also, to transform the way we talk about water.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said something very beautiful the other day, and I wish I could quote the original person who said it, but, water isn't a resource, water is a relative. So the language that we use is so important. And part of the struggle today is working with very reductionist scientific language that reduces things to H2O and claims to think it understands water when we understand very, very little about this incredible infinite consciousness of life. And as we claim to understand it, we also, people say, okay, we'll put ingredients into we'll put ingredients onto products, for instance. So you've got a whole lot of very scientific names there. And even on food products.
Right.
So, it's, a parent's responsibility what the child eats. It's not it's not the marketer's responsibility, and it's not the producer's responsibility. We just have to put ingredients on the label, and then it's okay. And yet we know that it's artificial to think that anyone who is struggling for money, I don't understand most of those labels, but anyone who's struggling for money and who has not been through any kind of scientific training, which is most of us, can look at these ingredients, say, well, I don't understand it. I'm sure if it's, I'm sure if they're selling it here, it should be fine. So there's very sophisticated ways of saying, okay, we'll be transparent, we'll stick a label on it, but that's not enough. It really isn't enough. We have to look at the real consequences and take responsibility for the consequences of what we do, what we sell, what we market, what we advertise, and how we speak. Because until we take responsibility for that, we are leaving the game in place.
Right. Yeah. So again, I mean, it comes down to rights versus responsibilities, right? So it's about telling, right now we are organized around the idea that we have inherited the earth from our ancestors, and so we have a right to what we have inherited. Whereas, you're talking about a future in which we will be treating the earth as something that we have borrowed from our children.
Exactly.
And that we have a responsibility to maintain it and to hand it over to our children in a good way.
To our children and our fellow beings and our fellow elements and our fellow, we need to move from a human-centered consciousness, from this self-centered, narcissistic, myopic understanding of ourselves in the system, and really realize that we are a part of life and not apart from life or above life. So it's a very big consciousness challenge. And that's, again, where I'm going back to water, because I feel like it's such a direct road to this incredible transformation. Because when you talk about water, everything changes. When we start, if we have a world water law, we'll actually have to learn about water. What is the role of water in our life? What is the role of water in our health? When we start to learn about water, we start to recognize our interconnectedness with everything. We start to develop greater empathy with all of life. We start to understand our own health. We start to look at what's being put into our food. And it's all through this one particular focus. Because when we talk about water, we're talking about all of life. We're not talking about a part of the whole, we're talking about the whole, and just with this multifaceted prism. So in some ways, it's just this wonderful, loving being that is there to rebirth us as humanity at this time in terms of our consciousness, so that we step up in our consciousness, and through water shift not only our consciousness but our laws, our structures, everything we do. Because when you learn how water moves through the system, you see this incredible intelligence that really just gives life abundantly. And how do we as human beings learn how to do that rather than just take life?
Right. Yeah. So one of the questions that has come up in the chat box is, how do we, can we start with rainwater and say that that's okay? And it's a very interesting question, because one of the things we discovered, and one of my first education about water happened in this village in Rajasthan, India, remote village, where I had to take a 4x4 for 3 hours to get to the village, through these mud roads and things like that. And there, we were studying why the women had less life expectancy than men. They live 8 years less than the men. And it turned out, and so the analysis was that they had this less life expectancy than men because they were the ones who were doing the cooking.
Yes.
And when they were cooking with firewood inside their home. And we analyzed the firewood smoke, and we discovered that it was full of industrial toxic chemicals. Okay? It was like she was breathing, she was smoking a pack of cigarettes every time she cooked a meal. And so we asked, how did this industrial toxic chemicals show up in the wood that's in this remote village in Rajasthan, India? And of course, it comes through the rainwater. So, because we are pouring all these chemicals up into the environment, into the air, and it's coming down in the rain, and it's being absorbed by trees. And trees are very good filters. So they filter this water, and they store all the toxic chemicals in their trunks and their branches. And the woman was cutting down the branches and burning it. So that's how she was getting the toxic chemicals in the wood. So when we tell them, hey, this is a bad way of cooking, this is hurting you now, they say, well, this is the way my grandmother used to cook, my mother used to cook, and nothing happened to her. Why are you telling me that this is bad, right? So it's about recognizing that we have done something. We have done something that has messed up our environment. And the only way out now is to help every one of us deal with it, right? So this is when I recognize that rainwater is also contaminated through our industrial activities. So there is no way out.
That's why, the question, where do we start?
Right.
Always for me feels like a challenge, because you have to start everywhere simultaneously. It needs to be a holistic healing intervention which starts at the source and happens everywhere. So this is also part of the idea for the World Water Law. What I see it being able to do, and it's also an invitation for all who are listening to consider it, how everybody can rise simultaneously from their unique perspective, from their unique discipline, to rise simultaneously around the planet and work in whatever form is right for you to promote the World Water Law. It can be as an educator, it can be as a farmer, it can be as a scientist, it can be as a political activist, it can be in any which way. But we can all bring our gifts to making it happen. And you can just see that simultaneously everywhere on the planet, people can rise and say the same thing. And that's extraordinary, because working, when we start anywhere, if you say, okay, let's start with education. How can you start with education when you don't have food? So, or if we start with the economy, how can you start with the economy when we're so divided socially and culturally? So we need this whole system approach. So part of Codes for a Healthy Earth, which people can see at www.codes.earth, is this whole system framework which says we have to stop thinking about where we start, and then we have to think, this is the package deal that we need. We need to address all of these things simultaneously. Just one, and then you see this upswelling, this whole system healing response everywhere at the same time. And when we start with water, the beauty is that we are starting everywhere simultaneously, because in some ways it says, oh, okay, so we're starting with water, but that means we are starting with gender issues, we're starting with race issues, we're starting with food, we're starting with everything simultaneously, because water is life. And that's the beauty of it.
Right. So I put the codes.earth/water law, the web page for people to go and look at the water law. And so there is a petition that's associated with the water law right now?
Right. So there is a petition. So just to finish that previous one around the rainwater, yes, we can't just start with rainwater. We have to start with all water simultaneously, and the water cycle, and making sure all humans, receive and animals receive the water. It has to be simultaneous. So the petition. So how do we do this? How do we make this happen? World Water Law. What a crazy idea, and yet. We have, as you often say, Silas, and I often quote you on it, it's an engineering question. It's not if, it's how we do it. And when we put our collective creativity to making it happen, we can do it. There's enough genius, there's enough creativity, there's enough resolve and resourcefulness to get this done. The first thing we did was to create a petition. Now, the petition actually states what the World Water Law is in a short way, and it gets people to sign up to it as a call for action. It's almost like, you can imagine, we're not taking the petition to any one particular person or any one governance body, because that doesn't work. It's more a call to action to say, here we are, and we support this. And when we get enough signatures, it just says, look how many people are behind this particular law. But more than that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be activating on the 1st of January, World Water Year 2021, which is intended as a space, as a campaign, as a whole system healing activation. The space of a year where we can gather momentum and people can join the movement, self-organize for it, and meet each other, build on each other's resources, amplify each other's initiatives, and come together for this one creative purpose in service of life. So the World Water Year will give a space for this to happen. And we've also building a technology, an online platform, which will be able to be there in service of our self-organization for the World Water Law. And so anyone who's interested in joining, we're asking them to please sign up for the codes for a healthy earth at, they're two different things. Codes for a healthy earth, you'll see on the homepage of that website, www.codes.earth. That's the original framework. And if you sign up there, you'll get our newsletters and we'll invite you onto the platform. And the Water Law and World Water Year 2021 is the first global initiative of Codes for a Healthy Earth.
Okay.
And so on the World Water Law, you can please sign the petition and then sign up for the codes, and then we'll invite you into this evolving community around the World Water Law that that is developing to really take this forward in World Water Year 2021.
So are you also beginning 2021 with the 7 days of rest?
Yep. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. So thank you for bringing that up too. There's a special event that we've been doing for the last 4 years, 3 years. This is the fourth event. It's called 7 Days of Rest, and we do it annually from the 1st to the 7th of January every year. It's a way of beginning the new year with deep intention for the healing and replenishment of the planet and all its inhabitants. It creates this global field of intention and consciousness so that we can leverage that focus of the new year on recommitting ourselves to what is important to us, to putting the planet and all its inhabitants at the center of our consciousness. And each year we have a slightly different theme. This year our theme was 7 Days of Rest and Radiant Diversity, as a way of really understanding the importance, the essential nature of diversity in our collective healing, whether it's biodiversity or human diversity. And so it was a very beautiful event. It's a self-organizing event. It invites people from all over the world to join forces, to come on board, to offer an event, to participate. It's and so this year we're calling it 7 Days of Rest and Radical Healing.
Okay.
And we're inviting people to bring their wisdom and healing practices and intentions and prayers to the field. And we will be putting obviously a special focus on water, and we'll be inaugurating World Water Year 2021 within this field of deep intention and prayer and inspiration, from the more spiritual to the more scientific. Everybody's welcome to bring in their unique gifts and healing wisdom from the personal to the collective to the planetary.
Okay, so the 7 days of rest will also have ceremonies, healing ceremonies during those 7 days that people can participate in?
That people can participate in. For that website is www.7days-of-rest, and it's the number 7. So on that website, you can actually go in and you can see the entire events from 2018 to 2020. Closer to the event, we'll be putting up the schedule. And yes, there will be healing ceremonies, there'll be healing wisdom, there'll be a variety of inspiration, art, poetry, storytelling. There'll be some experiential events, whatever people bring to the event. And so there's already some beautiful events taking shape. You've been part of it for the last few years.
Yes.
Again, it's actually an event where people don't have to spend time too much on the computer. It's not like you have to go through the day and participate in a certain amount. It's a widespread offerings that people can tap into and be nourished by what they feel is most nourishing to them. So it's a kind of buffet of opportunities to connect to this field of intention and healing.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to add that we haven't covered so far?
Yeah, I think that, I think maybe it's worthwhile to go a little bit deeper into this, especially within the context of the United States and the whole world at the moment, in terms of the political situation, how I think this whole revisiting of governance is such an essential piece to put at the center of our conversations. And I always like to put in the center of that conversation, what is the purpose of governance?
Right.
So as we start to discuss governance, we talk about it in terms of the symptoms of politics, what's really happening, and get caught in this drama of news and fake news and misinformation and all of that. As we begin to reclaim our authority and responsibility as citizens to say, no one else is going to figure this out for us. We actually have to take action and start to redesign how we govern ourselves. If we start with the question of what is the purpose of governance, and can agree on one thing, that the purpose of governance, the only legitimate purpose of governance, is to protect and cultivate the health and vitality of the planet and all its inhabitants for generations to come. The whole conversation changes because we start to look at in what ways is our current system doing that, and in what ways is our current system actually going against that. And if so, how do we renovate? How do we really redesign governance, working from that purpose, with all the structures, all the laws deriving from that one purpose? And if that's the purpose of governance, then it means it's the purpose of all sectors. Right. So the purpose of media, for instance, what is healthy media? What is media for a healthy earth? How would we take up our roles if the only role of media, for instance, the only legitimate role, was to cultivate the health and vitality of the planet and all its inhabitants for generations to come? Right. It goes to every sector. What would an economy look like that had that purpose? So we start to look at, all of these different pieces and say, okay, so if that's our purpose, how do we do it differently? And what we need is leaders from all of these sectors who are not caught in the game, but rather are there in deep service to lead from within. The lawyers, the media people, the scientists, the doctors, all to say, if our profession is in service of the planet and all its inhabitants for generations to come, how do we need to redesign our particular sectors, our particular disciplines, our particular areas of expertise? And how do we hold ourselves and everyone else responsible and accountable for going against that? But first, we have to really get back to the purpose. And when I talk about the purpose of governance as being, cultivating the health and vitality of the planet and all its inhabitants for generations to come, I think almost all species do that instinctively. Right. That's how they organize themselves as well. You may have a leader of a species, but it's a temporary leader. It doesn't hold onto its chair. It doesn't hold onto its power. It's only in service as long as its capacity makes it the right individual to lead the pack. Right. So, this holding on to power and this governance for power and profit goes against, again, the natural organizing laws of nature, which yeah, as we've spoken about, speak very, work very, very differently. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, basically, we as a species have, using these games and these stories, we have been able to manage to get billions of us working together. It may be for the wrong purpose at the moment, but we have found a way to do that.
Right.
So it's now using that methodology to actually do something for the good of the whole.
Exactly.
Right. So it's, again, for the purpose that you're talking about, which is, the only legitimate purpose of governance is to protect and cultivate the health and vitality of the planet and all its inhabitants for generations to come. Absolutely, we agree. Now, how do we now organize ourselves for that purpose?
Exactly.
And so that requires a different constitution, because to me, I'm looking at it as the how. This is the engineering side of me saying, okay, how do we do this? How do we use these same methodologies that we have used to govern ourselves among, and coordinate our actions among billions of us to actually do the same thing for the side of peace as opposed to the side of violence? And so it comes down to, again, creating a constitution that we can all agree on that is now for that purpose. It's a different purpose. So how do we organize ourselves? We need to organize ourselves around watersheds, around protecting watersheds. We need to organize ourselves around protecting ecosystems and thriving ecosystems. And so it is a different way of organizing ourselves, and then contributing, each one contributing their own gifts, into making these things happen. So this is part of the dialogue we have started, actually. Summer Rose is going to be contacting you on some weekly meetings that we are going to organize around a discussion for a new constitution.
Wonderful.
That's basically a document that we can all govern ourselves around, and say that this is. So again, putting what I've just said to you in on paper, so that we can all agree, right? That's, yeah. So this is something that obviously it has to be discussed. It's not just, I'm not the only one who has ideas here. We know that.
Right.
But it's about discussing and getting good people to come together with the right purpose to discuss these things, and so that we can now figure out how the butterfly is going to be organized, because we know how the caterpillar is organized.
Right.
And caterpillar has done its job of creating technologies. We are using the caterpillar's technology right now to talk to you, even though we are far away from each other. Where do you live? You live in Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem. Yeah. So here I am in Phoenix, talking to you in Jerusalem.
Yeah. So one of the things also when we speak about governance, to me, it's about who are the experts? Who do we really want? Whose voices do we really want to make the decisions of how to manage a pandemic? Do we want a bunch of technocrats with profit-driven agendas,
right,
who know nothing about health to be deciding this? Or do we want people who have a more whole system, healing understanding? So how do we get the expertise in? And the other piece of it is, how are decisions made according to what criteria? And again, sometimes I'm amazed by the simplicity of the answers when we go back to nature, because the answer, the one discerning principle for all decisions, as far as I understand it, needs to be, what is the impact of this decision on the health of the whole for future generations?
right.
That's one discernment principle that seems self-obvious. Now, it's hard, when we shift from a technocratic language to a language of health, the conversation becomes very different. And so part of our, I think, work to do is to help bring the political discourse into another language. When we talk the language of health, and particularly whole system health, it takes away a lot of the argument. People can say, well, who's to decide what's healthy? Who's to decide? And right now we've got a real problem because science and medicine has been co-opted. So you don't know which doctors to believe. They're doctors that are saying pro-vaccine, against vaccine, which is a superficial argument anyway, because it really is so reductive that it creates polarity rather than discerning which vaccine, what's involved in the vaccine. If you're going to be killing hundreds of thousands of sharks to develop a potential vaccine, you know, that may save a few people's lives, but may destroy, you know, the whole planetary ecosystem. It's not viable. So how are we making these decisions? What are the criteria? Who are the experts? So this is a conversation I really look forward to going deeper with you, because that's part of really reinventing ourselves as a species and how we govern ourselves. And now, as we evolve, hopefully, and manage to shift the trajectory, we are going to have to agree on where we're going. And I think that agreement can come when we change the language to health, because who decides? Well, the bees decide. Is it good for the bees or is it not good for the bees? There's a great understanding of whether it's healthy for all. What does it do to water? What is this technology? What is its impact on water? If it fragments the water, then it's obviously going to be really bad for us. We don't need to do animal testing. We just need to test it on water, understand that if it fragments water, it's going to fragment our physical being. It's not good for us. It's going to undermine our immune system. So these kinds of conversations around how we reinvent governance from the start feels a very, very important one to have at this particular moment within our political crises and our ecological and health crises. Yeah, it's time to be creative.
Yeah. So it's one of the actions that we proposed during the recent convergence, the Vegan World 2026 convergence. One of the actions was that we need to form a constitutional convention to talk about what is the constitution for a vegan world. And this is why, I want to look at I want to invite people who I know their intentions are good, because they have at least acknowledged that, pandemics come from animals. And so we should be stopping the raising animals like this. So I'm listening to vegan doctors who are, fundamentally have acknowledged that eating animals and exploiting animals is not good for us.
Right.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're right. We don't know what their intentions are when they come to the conversation. And
Absolutely.
you're right about the language as well. We need to be very careful with that. And I'm really looking forward to this convention and your participation in it.
Love to. Thank you so much.
Please, I know Summer is going to contact you. A lot of people are going to contact you. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Shelley, for this amazing conversation as always.
And thank you for inviting me and for everything that you're doing in such a big way. We'll speak soon, and I very much look forward to this discussion, going deeper into it.
Sounds good, Shelley. Thank you all very much for being here. So next week we are going to have a change of days. So we're going to be moving from Mondays to Tuesdays, but the same time. So it'll be Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Pacific time next week. So we'll be making an announcement week.